Fantastic. Right, so I'm April Edwards. I work for Microsoft. I'm an Azure AppDev specialist. What does that mean? I help customers that are looking to move to Azure, get to the cloud, re-architect their applications, and get them into Azure or any other, sometimes other cloud providers, and have a very hybrid model. But it's a lot about breaking down the apps and rebuilding them. So today we're going to talk about Visual Studio 2019. Did anyone watch the keynote and release the last couple of weeks? Has anyone seen the videos? Couple? One, two? Fantastic. You can follow me on Twitter at @TheAprilEdwards. You can put photos up, make comments, make jokes, whatever you want. But yeah, let's get started. So I think if you're a developer, you've been developing for quite some time, the landscape in which you've been developing in has become a lot more complex in the time from probably when you started. A lot more broad expertise is required these days. A lot more complicated systems with a massive back end and a massive front end that's kind of going forward. And multiple technologies that are kind of being used in different languages. I work with a lot of customers that have maybe a C# team or a Python team with different specialties. And a lot of these guys have to cross-platform quite a bit. And girls. And we see a lot more machine learning and AI going into our apps, and our apps are a lot more complex. They're not just simple code anymore. A lot of our businesses are requiring us to do more with that code, and then how do we do that? So when you look at modern app development, we start looking at containerization. We're moving away from virtual machines as such, and we're moving to microservices and serverless applications. Now, when we talk serverless, there's still compute behind this. So we don't get rid of virtual machines. There's still data center. There's still someone's hardware, but we start abstracting that and going code first, which is what every developer wants to do. And then we have multiple experiences and endpoints that we're seeing from our apps as well. So a lot of customers we see are working mobile, so mobile devices, so your mobile phone, laptops, et cetera. But then we're seeing bots. How do we enhance the app experience by creating a bot and putting that on the front end or the back end? And we're also seeing a lot with devices. So a lot of you have wearable devices on today. You can track everything. I work a lot in the healthcare sector. So the healthcare sector is very keen on using these devices and saying, how do we integrate that into our apps and make those go a bit further? So when VS 2019 was launched, they wanted to make it with a mission statement of the best in-class tools, services for any developer, any app, and any platform. That is their mission statement. So we do support other clouds. We do support any platform you want to bring to the table. And when we devised Visual Studio 2019, we took the developer in mind. We didn't just build a product and you go, what is this? I think Microsoft has had a history of saying, we've built this product, go use it. And you look at it and go, I don't like that, I don't like that, I don't like that. We built it with the developer forefront of the technology. So when we developed it, we kept the developer tools at the front. So you have Visual Studio 2019, you have Visual Studio Code. How many of you use Visual Studio Code? Fantastic. And then most of the customers I work with do as well. We also have Visual Studio for Mac. A lot in our organization, in Microsoft, I have a lot of my colleagues using Macs. It's just preference. When you log into Azure, we have Cloud Shell. You can launch Bash script if you want, or you can go PowerShell. It's completely up to you. So we support both, and that's just showing Microsoft embracing any platform. And then developer services. So we have things like Visual Studio IntelliCode built in, LiveShare, App Center, and Azure DevOps. How many people are using Azure DevOps today? Fantastic. And then GitHub. So you may have heard about this acquisition of GitHub. It's been a bit controversial, but I'll talk about it in a minute and how we've kind of embraced it. And then when we talk about using these best-in-class tools, cloud platform. We have a lot of customers today sitting in a cloud-hosted private data center potentially, or their own data center, or either in Azure looking to go to Azure. And they might also be looking at another cloud provider, either GCP or AWS. So the big part of Visual Studio 2019 is helping the developers pull in the full life cycle of what they're doing. So we develop, we deploy, we test, and we debug. The whole point is collaboration. So a lot of you heard the phrase DevOps. I think it's kind of a bit of an overused term. No one really always tends to know what it really means. But let's break it down for a second. So when you have DevOps, you have developers and operations. Very two siloed parts of an industry that we see within organizations quite a bit. So a dev wants to go, right, I want my code here, and the operations go, nope, can't have resources. Either we're out of resources or we need more. And there's always kind of a battle. So I've made it my mission to work with a lot of organizations to collaborate together in a full DevOps model. Why? So we can do this full life cycle, code first, and then the infrastructure teams kind of look at it and go, well, what's my part in DevOps? I work with a lot of organizations that talk about infrastructure as code, repeatable design, especially in the cloud. I do a lot of work with Terraform, and it's things we can deploy on-premise in a VMware environment or in the cloud. And these guys are using Visual Studio Code potentially, or even Visual Studio 2019. But we're here to support the developers end-to-end as well as the operational teams. So Visual Studio 2019, they want to make much more than just your standard IDE. They have 3 different editions that they've put out. So we have the Community Edition, which is for free, which is great for an organization that has less than 5 people in it. Anyone in a kind of an academic environment, we do offer free licensing as well. We have a massive open source project contribution into Visual Studios that I believe Microsoft's one of the largest contributor in the world to the open source community. I don't have the stats offhand, but we do sit on a lot of the open source boards as well. So the ones I'm going to focus on today are going to be professional and enterprise. So professional and enterprise, we do see organizations using both, and it just depends on what kind of feature sets that they look for. But they are licensed for more of your enterprise environment. When you buy either license, you get the IDE access to both PC and Mac. So you have multiple different devices in your environments, we will support that. It's great for developing and testing in the cloud, and when you get Azure credits with it. So Visual Studio subscriptions has meant to be this one-stop shop for every developer. So we've put out developer tools and services, support into Azure, training support, and dev test resources as well. So for the developer tools and services, you get the latest version plus the previous for both Windows and Mac. And you get access to Azure DevOps services as well. So in terms of Azure, you get monthly credit. I'll go into this a little bit more in a moment. But you also get dev test pricing, which is super key for deploying your workloads and being able to test things without paying the full price. Something you don't get on premise, because when you build a server today, you have to write, right, I need a VM, or I need this resource, I need this capacity. When we do dev test pricing, we can do it at a discounted cost because it doesn't go into production workloads. And we integrated EMS into a lot of Azure as well, and with the VS 2019. Training and support. I work with a lot of organizations. They go, great, all this technology is fantastic. How do I learn it? How do I keep up with it? So that's why we've given you access to Pluralsight, LinkedIn Learning, and other resources so that you can continually learn and build your knowledge as a developer. And the dev test software, Microsoft Windows, and other apps, I want to get into a little bit more in depth. Because I think this is a key feature that a lot of customers go, the cloud's expensive, the cloud's expensive. Absolutely. In a traditional data center, like I kind of said before, you're going off and buying compute, and you need hardware, you need cooling, you need power behind that. So how do we mitigate that in Azure? We offer dev test pricing. So if you go into the pricing calculator, at the top right-hand corner there's a little tick box you hit, dev test pricing. It will discount at a certain % of that workload, which is really great if you're looking to just test some, I don't know, some VMs out, SQL databases, things like HD Insight, logic apps, and functions. Really get a really good way to get your kind of, your teeth wet into the new technologies. Now, what's really good about this as well, we have something called Azure Dev Test Labs, which is its own subscription, so I don't want to get into it, but you can use your dev test pricing in your EA agreement. So most customers that have something like an EA agreement, they get Azure credit. You can pull from that EA agreement, so it can be part of your monthly budget, and then deploy from that without having to use a separate subscription or put down a credit card. One of the great new features of Visual Studio is GitHub Enterprise Access. This is going to get released May 1st, but you'll get GitHub Enterprise Access with your Visual Studio subscription. So let's get started. I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a demo of Visual Studio for those that haven't seen it yet in 2019. So this is the interface that you come up with. When you pull up Visual Studio 2019, it can show your recent projects. You can pin important projects to your dashboard, and you can get started. You can clone or check out code. You can bring your code from GitHub. You can bring your code from Azure DevOps. You can open up an existing project or create a new one. I want to create a new project with you guys today on the fly, and this is hoping everything works. So when we create a new project, they've added some new features in the search capability. Search hasn't always been as reliable. So you can search for a product up here and go, right, I want to deploy an Azure function. It comes on the top of it. The other thing you can do is, because we have a lot of features that have been added into it, you can search by language. So if you're a C# developer, here you go. If you want to know Python, what resources are available to me, we've now added in these little bars. If there's a specific platform that you're deploying to. So if you're deploying to something like an app with Xamarin or Android, iOS specific, we have very specific tooling in here that you can just pull it from there. And you can also sort by kind of project type. What are you deploying today? Are you deploying kind of an OS model, etc.? I want to just deploy a simple web app today. So I'm going to store it locally on my machine. So we're going to launch this locally. We're not going to go into the cloud just yet. So when I go in to create my new web app, you see up here I have authentication options. I'm not going to add any authentication in. You can integrate Azure AD or local authentication to that web app. I'm going to configure this for HTTPS. We can enable Docker support. That's a new feature. So there's an increased set of features for Docker and containerization from Visual Studio 2019, which is fantastic. So I'm going to create a web app for us today. Give me a second while I format this to show up. Right, we have a very simple web app. Nothing crazy. So this is deployed locally to my machine, stored locally, saved on my hard drive. Actually, in my case, I have it saved to my OneDrive so that it is backed up in the cloud. So I built this web app, and I go, right, now what do I want to do with it? I actually wanted to use LiveShare. Now, LiveShare is a great product, new in VS 2019. Has anyone heard it yet or heard about it, what it does? So we live in a world of remote workers. How many of you work remotely or travel quite a bit for your job? Cool. So I do as well. I'm here today. I have a colleague that is going to dial us in, that I'm going to dial into. I want to work with my colleague Colin. I want him to contribute to my web app today. So Colin and I are on a call. I'm using Teams right now to collaborate. I'm going to say, hey, can you join? I want to work on our code together. So I'm going to go up here to LiveShare. I've already configured mine. So you can authenticate within your organization or send a link externally to someone else. So I'm going to click on LiveShare. I'm going to share my account. So up here in the top right-hand corner, it's going to start sharing my experience. So I want to run a debugging session with Colin, who is sitting remote. Colin's actually sitting in Brighton right now. So I'm going to copy the link. I'm going to go into Colin. Hi, Colin. Can everyone say hello to Colin? Hello. Colin, can you say hello? Sorry, we can't hear you. But Colin, I've just created a link for you. If you could please log into our session. I'd like you to make some changes to our code if you could please. So what Colin's going to do is he's going to log into the session. Give me 2 seconds while I get the screen back to formatting. Apologies. Colin, hold on for 2 seconds, please. All right, Colin, we're back up. So Colin, could you please show everyone how I'm distracted. We've joined a session. I believe I'm sharing. You can see in the right-hand corner that I'm sharing. Can you just redirect my focus, please, Colin? Because we're in a meeting, but I'm actually looking at something else. Maybe I'm looking at an email. Could you just get my eyes into the code you're looking at as you're reviewing this for me? Let's see if Colin's still on. So we should be able to say, yep, Colin's logged in there. You can see it's colinbeals@hotmail.com. He's making changes in my code. We're sharing a debug session. So he's making live changes and we can collaborate over LiveShare. Now you can also do audio through LiveShare. And so he's writing, hello audience. Hello from Brighton today. So he is working directly on my code. My code is stored locally on my machine, but we're collaborating together. So we can be in 2 different places, collaborate on our code, and share it, which I think is fantastic. Colin, can you add a breakpoint, please? There we go. So he can make edits into my code, we can collaborate together, and I can run a debug session together, and let's see what happens. So Colin can see all of this exactly from his side. I can see what changes he's making, and we know exactly how we're working on the project together.
Can you share with just one person?
You can share with multiple people. So if you have a whole team, let's say 5 or 10 developers that you're trying to work with, so I do a lot of work with customers, and they go, right, can you have a look at this? I can't always get on a train and go 5 hours up to where they are, or logistics, time, cost, etc. So we can set up a live session here and start making changes to the code as well. So there's a lot of cost savings and a lot of collaboration enablement within VS 2019, which I think is a phenomenal feature. So live share is personally one of my favorite features, because I know my code stinks. So I can get someone on, like Colin, to log in and say, right, let me help you out with that. Let me have a look at it, and we can build our website. So again, this is all running locally. We should have a website building up quite soon. I blame the internet in here. It's slow. Cool, and we have a working website, just like that. Colin's made his collaboration points on there, and we're all good to go. Thank you, Colin. So I'm going to hang up on Colin, respectfully. We're going to end our session. So you can do audio from within live share itself. So I'm going to attempt to pull this back. Right, hopefully this works. Fantastic. So we're back in business. That's what I like. Right, for those of you that use VS Code that maybe aren't using VS 2019, the whiteboarding sessions are really cool. So you can launch a whiteboard from within Visual Studio Code and collaborate. So maybe you don't need to talk about something, maybe you talk about a project, and we don't need to change any code, but we can set up a whiteboard in Visual Studio Code and collaborate with our colleagues across the world. So live sharing is also enabled in Visual Studio 2019. So in this case, we can work on our project, check on the different components, break it down, and build it back up together. Questions? Stunned, amazed, and all? So one of the other great features I really like about Visual Studio 2019 that really excites me is IntelliCode. IntelliCode is great for those of you using C#, C++, and XAML. It augments your IntelliSense experience by using context-aware code completions, tooltips, and signature help instead of using alphabetical order or most recent. Now, the contextual recommendations are based off the fact that we use best practice development from open source code bases. So we went out to the industry and said, right, what are you guys compiling? What are the most common things? And that's how we built a very smart system. One of the other things we did is integrate more AI into Visual Studio 2019. So as we start talking about AI and how we implement it, we can get it in small ways that really are advantageous to us. So for those of you coding in C#, we have a new experimental ability within Visual Studio 2019. It uses an AI trained model. It's secured. It's locked down to your code and your code only. It doesn't use any open source context. It learns patterns from your code directly and not the open source domain. So it uses the methods on your own utility classes and domain-specific library calls. You can share the link of your trained model with your team, or you can keep it private, but you own the code, and I think that's very important for people to realize. It's not going out to the world or anything else. And if you want to build some consistency in your coding, we have things like the editor config file that is enabled in Visual Studio 2019. So it can be configured on demand, but the great thing about it is it matches your coding conventions once you enable it, and you can share it amongst your team, and it'll give you hints based off of your coding style. So you can say, right, I don't want to change my style. I don't want to use any open source methodologies. I want to know how my code can be better, and I want to keep consistency amongst all the code I have. So you're doing something like adding a config file in will do that for you. So refactoring tools. These are things that are built into Visual Studio 2019. So there is regex language support, and there's code fixes enabled in it. So it's easier to maintain your code and understand everything without changing the behavior of your code. It's very easy to enable, and I'll go through and start giving you suggestions on your code based off how you've structured. Again, this is using more AI into the product. So Azure integration. This is going to be one of my favorite topics. So I'm going to do another demo again, hoping I don't break anything.
Can I just ask for the refactoring tools, how does that conflict with tools like Resharper and stuff? When you have like non-Microsoft tooling, are they going to start fighting each other a lot? Or?
So, so you can bring your own tools into Visual Studio and into like things like Azure DevOps, et cetera, no problem in terms of the integration. I haven't tested different tools yet into VS 2019, so I don't have that answer to that, but I can take that offline and find out for you. Because I think we're showcasing all these great features and functionality, but the reality is everyone's using their own tools already and they may not want to change. And that's fair. That's absolutely fair. You've made time and investment into some products. So I think it's finding out kind of what those products are and how they integrate. We have a lot of guys back at Corp that potentially might have that answer. If not, it's one we can definitely raise the community and find out, because Microsoft is taking active feedback on their product today. So if there's things you want to feedback, questions we have, I can help link you into those channels and also help you with those as well. Right, so this isn't going to format, so we'll just do this the hard way. Right, so we're going to go back to our web app. So this web app's still running. And let's say, we've run it locally, we've tested, I've collaborated with my team. Now what I want to do, I want to put it in Azure. Now, when we go to put in Azure, we have a couple different ways to do that. You can go up to your web app and right click and say, publish. You can do that. It's not something we traditionally recommend because there's no consistency over the code. But I'm going to go to publish and say, right, I can go straight to Azure, host all my code locally, launch it as an app service, great. But actually, I don't want to do that. I want to do something else. So I want to configure continuous delivery. So a lot of you may have heard Ed Thompson speak today. He's going to talk about Azure Pipelines. So I can deploy this directly into Azure Pipelines from VS 2019. And I can pick all I need to do is pick my subscription. I'm going to create a new app service plan and then deploy it from there. Ed's going to cover off the Azure Pipelines bit, so I don't want to carp into that too much, but you can deploy directly from VS 2019 into your Azure Pipelines to consume Azure DevOps. So we have a bunch of connected services in Visual Studio 2019 that are really good. So how many of you heard of Application Insights in Azure? Great, so good portion of you. So Application Insights will gain visibility into your application, how it's working, load testing, et cetera, and get better insights into what your app is actually doing. You can export that out into Power BI. It's a massive integration platform here. But we can monitor our app today by enabling Application Insights. I can build things like cloud storage, et cetera. I can just go in and find more services that I want to integrate into my app. So I built my app, I've done my code first, but the business is saying, actually, we need these other elements involved. Okay, cool, I can do that from here. Now, authentication with Azure AD, I didn't build it into my app now, but we can add it in later. So things like, or adding in your organizational AD into your app is fine. And then you can configure single sign-on as well from there. So if I go back to publish, I want to pick an app service. I want to create a new Azure app service. So basically I'm creating my website directly code first. There is going to be compute behind it, but I don't have to build a VM, which means I don't have to wait for my infrastructure team to do their thing. So I'm going to configure it as a release. We're going to save it. And it's going to publish it out for us. Maybe. There we go. So I've gone in, locally deployed my code, I've tested it, I've collaborated with my colleagues with it. I want to build this web app. So I'm going to give it the name Web Application Gray Matter Demo. This will be its public DNS name. Now when we deploy these things into Azure, you can bring your own custom DNS names as well. So don't worry, if that's not the name you want to keep, you can certainly change it later. So I'll pick my subscription from Azure. I have a resource group that I want to deploy into. and I can choose the hosting plan for this app service. So I can choose the compute that I've already predetermined that I've set up. So I can just choose that. That's not a problem. I can actually add the application insights capability here. So actually, I want to deploy to UK South, and actually, I've been told by the business I need some storage, and I need to connect to a SQL database. So I can just create a storage account from here with my web app, and it's all done for me. So I can just pick the locations of where I want to deploy it to. Just a standard account, okay, create. So what we'll have here in a minute is a working website in Azure. So I've deployed this locally while I'm standing here with you guys, at a risk that the internet will keep working on Wi-Fi, and everything will go together. I've worked with my colleague over LiveShare to test my code, and now I'm going to deploy it into Azure, and it's doing it for me. And again, I can deploy into continuous delivery using Azure pipelines. So I'm going to let this run. Does anyone have any questions in the meantime?
The Mac version versus the Windows version, they feature exactly the same? Everything you've shown us is in Mac version.
Yeah.
Is what I'm saying.
Yep. So the question was, in the Mac version versus the Windows OS version of Visual Studio 2019, are the features the same? Yes, they are. So as long as you have the licensing appropriate, yes, the features will be the same. There will be a few things that might be different, potentially some smaller niche things, but in terms of Visual Studio 2019, yes, they've made it very comparable currently today. They wanted to make sure that Mac developers and those preferring Windows devices had the same experience. It's something we've done, that Microsoft has done completely in the cloud as well. So whether you prefer Bash or PowerShell, there's two ways to do it. You can always bring your own code. So they wanted to focus more about what language do you want to develop in, and the platform will enable that. So Visual Studio 2019 should be able to run on both without any issue. I don't have a Mac with me today to test, but yes.
My other question was Action Pack subscription. Is that the same as a Visual Studio subscription, or do you get more with a Visual Studio subscription?
So the question was about the Action Pack subscription, or licensing model. I don't actually know. I believe it's separate, but I can look that up for you. Yes?
With the AI element of Visual Studio learning your style of code, is that something that it learns as you code, or can you point it at a repository of like legacy code and it learns from your legacy?
So the question was, can you point the IntelliCode piece to your legacy code? So I was going to do that. I did do that. I had some code that was quite old, but the .NET version was like one dot broken. So while it was a great example, it didn't compile well in 2019. So yes, you can. The issue I came across while building my demos for you guys was the fact that it was .NET 1. It was .NET 1. It was quite old. It was quite legacy, but it pulled out a lot of errors in it. But there were so many errors in the code that actually, had I taken the time to go through the code, yes. So if you do have legacy code and you have some extra time on your hands, for the purpose of this demo, I did struggle with the timings to get it deployed for you guys. But yeah, you can go through, look at your legacy code, bring your code to the table, and look at applying IntelliCode to a lot of those as well. Yes?
I have a question specifically about all the tooling for C++. You've demonstrated quite a lot with .NET Core. I primarily work with C++, and historically the tool support has not been as extensive as C++ as a hard language to work with. So how much of this is available for C++? Is IntelliCode available? Is advanced refactoring available?
So the question was C++ capability in Visual Studio 2019, because it is quite a more difficult language to code with, yes. The whole purpose in 2019 was to enable better use of, to enable developers to code better with C++. Some of the features I showed today are not available. So the IntelliCode is available for some bits of it, but not for pulling out the kind of the multi-text context code, yes. For learning your code, no. So the C# capability in that is only in preview right now, which means it's a free feature. And it means you can contribute to anything that's in preview. So that will come into preview. I don't have dates of when that will. They don't tend to release those for us. But yes, it is currently C#. I think, to be completely honest, a majority of the developers are developing in .NET that we see. So it is coming, but it's certainly something you can give feedback to, we can take away with. The more requests we get for technology to go into our products, the sooner it comes to market. We see that especially in the cloud space. So I think Microsoft is very agile, a lot more than they potentially used to be. So while I know you feel a bit left out for doing C++, don't worry, more features will come.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes?
I was going to ask the same question, but for Python.
Yeah, so the question was same, but for Python. So yeah, absolutely, the same thing. I think we see so much with C# in development. So yes, Python's coming down the line. So we do support in VS 2019. Do you want me to pull up the screen so you can kind of see some of the capability of it, or?
No, it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, but a lot of the IntelliCode stuff won't be available. But in terms of coding with Python, fully capable. It's the IntelliCode stuff that we're a bit, because it is focused on the open source repos that we're pulling from.
Another question. Oh, sorry. Was with the support for legacy stuff like the kind of faux gap Cordova type stuff. Are you just dropping that and just going to Xamarin, or can you still do JavaScript projects in 2019?
So the question was about legacy builds for things like Go, you said, and JavaScript, or JavaScript. Yes, so we fully support JavaScript in VS 2019. The IntelliCode stuff was the limitation, but yes, JavaScript is fully supported. So yes, bringing your legacy apps in and refactoring them or keeping them in the older versions if you want to is absolutely supported. Sorry, another question in the back.
So I understand you can have 2017 and 2019 side by side, but I also understand there was an issue with .NET Core 2 and 3 sitting side by side, the RCs. So I don't know whether that is still an issue or whether it's resolved in production or whether you're aware of that.
So the question was, in Visual Studio 20, you can install Visual Studio 2017 and 2019 side by side, and there was versioning issues with .NET 2 versus 3, I believe. So I'm unaware of it today, but I uninstalled 2017 the other day, so I had both running, and then 2019 ran an update. I took out 2017. Brave. It only failed once last night, but it was an issue with Active Directory on the Microsoft side more than the product. So I've actually taken off 2017 to see how it helps or doesn't help. So I can take that offline for the .NET capability for the different versions, but then I can absolutely feed that back to corporate as well. We can see if anyone's had experience with it. But I think 2019 is so new. We have guys on the team that just literally, like, we haven't even installed it yet. We're still using 2017. But yes, you can run them side by side. So we can look up the compatibility question, certainly. Yes?
What's the biggest difference between professional and the enterprise version of 2019?
So the question was, what's so the question was, what's the biggest difference between professional and enterprise in 2019? It's going to be things like GitHub Enterprise. It's going to be all the tacked on added benefits. Also, you get a higher spend rate in the cloud. There is a list online. You get pretty much the same support. There's a few things on the support side that does change and a few features that get added into the enterprise suite.
You've got the testing, because sometimes the testing stuff doesn't make it through to the professional.
Yeah, so the question was, does it all go to the testing? Does the testing features all enabled in professional? Yes, there were a few limitations. I was looking at the matrix the other day. If there's anything specific, we can take a look offline and have a look at it if you want.
Seriously, enterprise is unfeasibly expensive.
So the question was about enterprise pricing. That depends on your EA agreement. So I don't handle any licensing or financials or commercials. I have a sales guy that does that because that's not my space. I think it depends on your enterprise agreement, honestly. So I think they've tried to ease up on the pricing a bit, but yeah, I mean, that's why they've tried to integrate more things like GitHub Enterprise into it and add it more feature rich to give it more value.
So I needed an extra bedroom in the house.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, I'm very lucky that I get to use it. I get to use enterprise version, but
I have been writing .NET code since .NET was around, and I've come through the sort of MSDN universal route. I think it was $2 grand, and it's now, so now enterprise is 3 times that.
yeah, I to be honest, I actually don't know what the 2019 dollar amount is for the price. But if anyone does have licensing questions, we can find those out. But there are ways around EA subscriptions to get that pricing a little bit more realistic. I don't honestly know because I don't handle the licensing bit.
Answer your action pack versus subscription question. If you go at professional level, the version you get is the same. The difference is the number of support incidents you get and the amount of free Azure credit you get.
Yeah.
Action packages as well.
You get unlimited pulls and push requests from both professional and enterprise. But yeah, there's an action pack difference. I don't have all the details on, but we can look that up as well.
So does professional support fakes now? Because it used to only be in enterprise.
The question was, does professional support fakes? I don't think so, still. We can look that up, but I don't think so. Yes, question, sorry.
Yes, is there any way of altering the colour scheme other than having a sort of light blue, dark blue colour scheme? Could you have is there a way of putting red on it, or
So the question was
something absolutely
different.
in contrast?
Yep.
So that the thinking behind this is that if you could open 2 instances of Visual Studio, and then you have those 2 instances presented to you within the IDE, which are distinctly coloured in some way, so that you knew that you were tackling the 2 instances, you knew which of the 2 instances you were tackling, it would bring a vast amount of increased flexibility to the whole development system. Because the human brain does not think in one deterministic pattern, it thinks in a non-deterministic way, and the way it's done in this sort of development is to have one deterministic way opened in one instance, and then another determinist crossing, if you like, at right angles, and another deterministic way opened in another instance. And when these things get muddled together in what is essentially the same sort of light blue, essentially the same colour, it's very difficult to see that on your screen and actually know which one you're implementing. And it leads on to basically, you know, when you started your presentation, you had the DevOps thing, develop and all the rest of it. It leads on to that, because it comes across immediately, having just listened to the DevOps thing, listening to you, that the way people think is not totally deterministic. It's non-deterministic route and a deterministic route. And if you can bring those 2 functions together within the same IDE and the same presentation, then you have a huge, huge flexibility over what you're doing. Now, does all that make sense?
Yes.
Because you see, if you design something and you've got a set of controls, doesn't matter what language it is, you've got a set of controls, so you develop the controls. You can be developing the controls and you may say, well, I'd like to have this control in my program. How would this tie up nicely together? So you can, in your mind, look at these 2 things and say, if I change that control a little bit, then I can use it. And if you bring into the 2 instances of Visual Studio the ability to compile and bring in your DevOps thing, in other words, it goes into production, it goes from a debug situation to a release situation, right? And then you do the thing in your other instance, and you sort of mentally transfer that. At the moment, the only way to do it is doable. It's with these 2 instances where you have, you can do one thing, then you have to develop it, then you have to go through all the references.
Right. Let's take this offline, because I can show you some ways to do this. Let's take this offline if you wouldn't mind afterwards. Is that okay?
Okay, yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. You understand what I'm talking
Yes,
about?
absolutely. So I can actually show you a few things we have done, but there's also, I think, ways we can improve it. I think that'd be some really good feedback.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, there's another question in the back. Yes.
During the live share, how much control does somebody have?
Yeah, so the question was during live share, how much control did Colin have on the presentation? He had full control into the code to debug and share the session completely. Now, he only saw my Visual Studio 2019 page. Now, I was using Teams, and yes, I can screen share, etc. So when you do Visual Studio Code and you do the whiteboard, they only see the whiteboard and the code. When you do it in Visual Studio 19, they'll see kind of that entire dashboard. So what you guys saw, he's seeing the exact same thing. I was going to try and do dual screen so I could have his screen up and my screen up so I could show that they were identical. wasn't going to work today, so didn't even try to break that. But you can actually show them up side by side, so you can see there's identical experience for both end users.
So they don't get to see the app or the browser window that might be running.
Right, so because the browser actually was running from my machine, because I've just launched this into Azure, the website, he would be able to browse to that as well. But I was running that completely locally from my machine. So if you are running something from Git, connecting to your Git repos, or from Azure DevOps, you both can contribute to it and they'll have access to that as well.
You both can type in at the same time?
Yes, but the point is
Cursor or two?
it'll be under one cursor. So actually we did this yesterday. So
Screw their mind a bit.
yes, you can. You can start changing code. They're like, they've done something, it's all right. And you're like, no, watch this. But they'll actually see the change being made and it will highlight your name making that change as you're doing it. So when Colin was making changes, his little name popped up. So if you have 5, 10 people on a call or on a live share session, you can see each person making changes as they need to. So if you need to break apart different parts of the code, you can have people in different sections and you can see what they've made. Yes?
Live share, do you have to use Microsoft Teams with that?
No.
Use over any other?
No, so live share is a feature of 2019, has nothing to do with Microsoft Teams. I just use Microsoft Teams for the ease of sharing and authentication with complications of trying to work on multiple screens. So if I'm working from home, I would just hit a live share, I just send the link. So if you are using Slack, you can absolutely integrate Slack into VS 2019 as well. So yeah, you can send over Slack or any other instant messaging platform if you want to, or send the invite directly to them. It gives like a direct session link, so whoever you decide to share that to will have access to that, and as long as they can authenticate in. Yes?
With Digital 2019, there comes the Wpf core that supposedly is installed in any operating system. Now, if I've been developing on 2017 Wpf application on the .NET framework, the migration to that is simple.
So the question was migrating from 2017 to 2019 on a Wpf app that you've already, OS that you've already built, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so the integrate. So on all the demos I did today, I did do things new. It depends. Do you know what version you're running?
Oh,
WPF?
no.
Okay, so I think it depends on the version. So there's still a few versioning issues. So like .NET 3 support is coming to 2019 very shortly. It's still using 2.x. So just it depends on the versioning. So the demo I was going to pull up to show broken code, very legacy code. It was supported, but there was so many reiterations in the code that actually it was quite a bit of a broken code that I pulled from, but that was out of Git, so that was what I expected.
There's a really good Channel 9 video on exactly that.
Yes.
On moving legacy WPF.
Yeah, there's a great Channel 9 video. I think Abel Wang's potentially presenting on it, and it's about moving your code from legacy systems into 2019. So I would check out the Channel 9 stuff. They'll have direct videos on how they've done it and some of the pitfalls they had. They'll talk about the really good stuff. So if you have very specific, maybe this won't work, look at some of the forums and the open source communities, and then people will probably start talking about it, especially as more people using 2019. Yes?
When using live share, the remote end, do they have access to everything in your IDE, context menu, custom tool windows from other extensions, say, that sort of thing? Or is it just basically the editor window?
Yeah, so the question was on live share, what do they have access to? So they had access, so Colin had access to all the context menus within that solution that I had up and running. So anything else I had running in my screen, he can see completely. So it's an exact replica of VS 2019. It was almost just like doing a screen share, but only to VS 2019. So you're just sharing the app, not your whole laptop. So if you want to be answering emails in the background or doing something else, if you're on a long call, you can do it from another screen. They won't be able to see that basically.
The whiteboarding thing, do you need to have the Visual Studio Code, or you can't bring the whiteboard into the VS 2019 or into the Teams?
So the question was about whiteboarding. Is it only available in Visual Studio Code? So it is available in Visual Studio Code. There's a plugin for it. It's not out for 2019 yet. I'm not sure why. Maybe it might be because of the live sharing piece, but you can enable it through live share. But the whiteboarding is very specific to VS Code. Now, Teams has its own whiteboard as well, and its own sharing capability. So I would probably just say if you're looking to whiteboard and do other things, you can use Teams, or you can go directly through live share in VS 2019.
So it's available as a plugin in Teams, yeah?
Yes. Yeah. So another question? Yes, sorry.
For the IntelliCode functionality, is there any intention to make it extensible for other language vendors for Visual Studio?
So for the IntelliCode, the question was for IntelliCode, is it going to be planned to go to other languages? Yes, it is. I don't have launch dates or know when the timings are. They don't release those to us.
Are there will there be support for non-Microsoft development languages necessarily?
Which ones are you thinking of?
Well, there's various language vendors for Visual Studio, not just C#,
Yes.
and so on. Will there be extension points into that functionality in some manner?
Yes, that's the plan. So that's on the roadmap. There's a really good link I can find that has the roadmap for Visual Studio 2019. Let me actually see if I can pull that up real quickly, because they may have released some timings since in the past couple days. So we have a website running in Azure. Fantastic. That was running in the background. So let me just pull up real quick. So this link down here, it's the bottom link, is the Visual Studio roadmap. That's a good place to look. So because this has just been launched, there's going to be so many new things coming down the pipeline. Anything that's in preview, like IntelliCode and kind of the C# capabilities, is free. So it's an added benefit of using VS 2019 at the moment. I'm not sure how the pricing structure will look in the long term, but it also means the support around it also changes as well when it's in preview. Any other questions? It's lunchtime. Let's go. Thank you all. I appreciate it.